Each different bubble of reality is true.
A galactic historian is a person that looks at all the lines of dramatic karma.
Nudge, nudge. It's the Holy Grail.
Improvise. Mysterious.
It's counter psychic intelligence.
Why is DNA farming of this star cluster so important?
Because we do manifest our reality. We do create our reality.
I think I have a whole nother universal Akashic record blending into me now.
Yep.
It's like a whole nother point of view on what's happened here. Well, in our universe, or at least our section.
Oh, that's actually interesting. Because, Andre, yesterday, I also had this experience of Andrew doing this other kind of a teaching. And the teaching was that he was walking through like maybe 2 inches of, an inch, maybe 2 inches of water in a flowing like river, like a flowing stream. And at the bottom were all these stones, but like little pebbles, but a little bit bigger than pebbles, but all round and all kinds of different colors and shapes and stuff like that. But his teaching in walking it was about having the infinite points of view, right? Like every stone is its own point of view. Mm-hmm. And if you flow like water over it and you're not stepping on other people's points of view, then you can have the infinite point of view.
I know exactly what you're saying, because in the Kung Fu, there's a clip where the master talks to the young student, and he talks about all the different points of view and the perceptions relative to the point of view, like him being an old, like, patient and thing, and he was talking from the perspective of the young student being exciting, new and unknown, you know, but there's everyone's got a different perspective. It was all about perspective, the clips.
I remember listening to that clip over and over again.
But this was something that I shared with Andrew this morning.
Fascinating. It's true, it's true. I know exactly what you're saying, it's very true.
So that is so fascinating it's kind of like, you know that show, How It's Made?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? Well, think of like having Andrew's perspective of like, instead of like how it's made, it's like, what's their point of view?
Compared to ours, because there's no reference.
Yeah. But, you know, having like 20,000 plus other points of views.
That's kind of what I told myself when I was trying to, young and justify what I was doing without justifying it.
It's just fascinating.
Because all Greeks do is argue their point of view. That's all Greeks do. Even if they know their point of view is wrong, they'll still argue it.
That's why, like in my principles of existence, the very first one is, how am I wrong in this moment?
Yeah.
Because if people actually had the courage to say, well, my perception is my perception, but I could actually be wrong. Like, what if I explore how I am wrong? What can I get out of it? Because it's the most resisted thing for people to accept in themselves,
Mm-hmm.
Because like most of the disagreements in the world over people wanting to hold their perspective as the perspective,
Right. It's the only perspective, which is zealotry.
Yeah. It's like, how can you contemplate having accuracy if you're not willing to sort of consider another point of view, you know?
Yep.
It's like you buy that mechanism, you're actually set up for failure, you know, because you're actually not willing to take on data sets, you know.
Uh-huh.
Because what is the reason behind not willing to take on more information to gain a better understanding of the situation? You know, that's the thing you got to instantly, when someone's not willing to explore it, it's like that's the block, you know. What's the issue in that? It's easy. So yeah, because it's actually very empowering when you actually consider you're wrong, because you learn so much. That gap that you're not willing to contend is where your growth is, right there.
So faster than memory is a speed. It has to be a consciousness term. So is memory at the speed of light? No.
So memory, you're talking like data that's stored in a planet Akashic record that's transferred between the universes or locations, or something else?
Just you basically step it up a little bit. It's not about the Akashic record. It's about the experience of memories being created and moving faster than the soul can create the light experience to match the memory. So like when you're driving really fast and the road's, zooming by you, ever been on a motorcycle moving at 120, 150 kilometers an hour?
Not really, but I used to watch like Formula One bikes and stuff, so I can appreciate it.
Yeah, you're just, the stuff in front of you, it's going by so fast. And I couldn't even visualize the thing in front. Everything was behind me.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it. Everything was behind me. Just so fast. Wow. All right, I got to focus the skill. That's the only way I can come out of this. All right, give me something to focus on.
Okay. We were going to talk about wizard, or the internet, like the internet, all right? You said the internet was created, like, perceived 200 years before.
Mm-hmm.
Like, with regards to the industrial age.
Okay.
So
there was a wizard.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a wizard class that could have been as many as 18 million of them, spread throughout anywhere, Europe, the Middle East. Different wizard class in India, China, Korea, Japan, more separated. The European wizard class was unified kind of under their lineages, because there was lineage wars that defined the classes as the breakdown of the various DNA farmers came and new ones came, because a lot of species had a breakdown during that time. The Americans, North Americans, Canadians, they weren't what we'll call wizard class as much as they were dream warriors, dream security officers. South America, they were kind of all of the above, a wizard class, a sorcerer class, a shaman class, etc., etc., etc. Polynesian islands were their own breakaway group of wizards trying to not be seen by the others, and Australia was the Dreamtime island of Dreamtime where all the wizards are trying to go. So the priest class, which was different than the wizard class, had a, let's call it epiphany over a period of a few hundred years, and saw that what they perceived was the wizard class getting all the money, all the power, the women, etc., etc. So within Rome, tried to form its own priest class, its own wizard class within the priestly society, and this began the bigger war between the political organizations of the Pope and the religions, etc., etc. And many of the wizards, because of the creation of this wizard priest class, could no longer hide in plain sight as a wizard with the beards and shit like that anymore, driving their chariots and just doing magic wherever they wanted to. They had to take up the facade of being a priest. So they took up the facade of the priest class, and there was obviously wizards who didn't want to take up the facade of the priest class, and they began to be hunted down by a variety of things that we'll just label inquisitions from various sects and orders throughout time. And then as the industrial age neared, the introductions of cannons to Europe, I believe 800, 700, 900 was the first cannons really introduced to Europe, though I believe the Byzantium Wars, Turks were using siege cannons that were like 100 feet long and took forever to move. But once you find that intersection where, in general, cannons were introduced to boats and ships like that, so they no longer needed to just, ram the ship and everyone would jump on board and hack everyone until everyone was dead. You could just shoot the cannon at the waterline and watch it sink or it catch on fire. That's where how do I put this? The AAA league of the exterior wizard class, that was their AAA league, the ships. There began a series of political battles that were strictly about the 3D world, 3D trading, even though the trading of energy was working on a bigger scale. This was the priest class versus the wizard class, each hiding behind their priestly facades, instructing their people to make certain types of deals or not make certain type of deals, which began the tug of war. And then finally the wizard class stepped forward, created the separation where England separated from the church, France had their issues, and a variety of other religious reformations began going on, as well as resurgence of various pagan concepts because they were suppressed in anywhere from Hungary, Romania, Poland, etc., where they began to spawn back up, and a variety of new wizards made their immigration into Europe, specifically into Germany, starting a variety of secret societies. They turned out to be hollow earthers of the Nivayuta Kochnaka, lightly translated, warriors of the right-handed blade, something like that. I don't know what that really means. Is something with their mythos. They began to form secret societies, and then they discovered there were thousands of secret societies within the priesting and wizard classes. And then a series of off-worlders came down to try to map all of the secret societies that were using consciousness technology. And this culminates into the overhead wars, which were in the skies. You have those German carvings. Well, there's a variety of other wars that happened at the same time. And it technically was a 120-year war in the sky, lights in the sky, ships falling, as many as 6.5 million ships involved in the process.
Back and forth, 1566, the big battle over Germany, they have that wood tablet. Mm-hmm. That was actually 250, 300,000 vessels involved in that, whole planet-wide, mass invasion. And, how do I put this? It changed consciousness then. Mm-hmm. And the system of domination and control needed to erase that. So they brought in the plague. They also brought in the plague to eliminate certain soul families that had a DNA lineage that already had a complete soul code. But all those people that died from the plague literally had a few seconds in the astral world to review their life, but they were forced back in.
Wow. So
they cleared the DNA that they didn't want, but kept the souls that they wanted.
Wow. That is really clever. Really clever. As George says, you have to give them
you have to give them credit.
For Wow.
Gotta give them credit.
Wow.
They didn't miss anything.
No.
that empowered the priest class and the warrior class and the wizard class to drive industrialization. So because they knew when the lights were in the sky, their prophecies were coming true, their zealotries were activated. Said wizard class created scientists as direct opposition to priests, and the priests created specialized secret societies that would remote view time similar to the mystery schools so they could counter science. So the alchemists, science versus alchemy versus religion. So that's the setup. And the priest class began to lose their power significantly, and then they were just kind of revealed as the wizards behind the priests. Greatly devalued their power, especially when they killed off a bunch of the Templars, because shortly after that, the Templars had their own little information released to all the kings and queens, nobles, and feudal states, and they're telling of the power of the church and what it's really doing, and what was in each post office was a black pole that was cursed with the original demonic blood, blah, blah, blah. The priests were very, very angry at this. It's like, nowadays, Snowden doing a dump, that was the Snowden dump of that day, and it made it out to a good portion of the society.
So what you're saying is like Friday the 13th is where there was like open warfare against the wizards, and the Templars were part of like the wizards. Is that what you're sort of saying?
Yes. Well, the Templars were playing both sides. They had agents. Yeah, they're playing both sides because they were the bankers to everyone.
Okay,
yeah.
I don't want to hold you up. You're going on a good stream, but that's like
so. Let's go to 1720, 1717. There is where there's a convention of scientific wizards, priestly wizards, and associations from the Asiatic Wizard Society. They all kind of met in Genoa, Italy, under a peace, their version of a peace flag where, no one's going to kill each other, bring your bodyguards, etc., etc. And there is where they charted industrialization in conjunction with 2,000 off-world species and all of the subterranean species that were going to be a part of the actual third density domination and control lineages, because many of the hollow earthers had to make choices that they had to come to the surface and be born into 1, 2, or 3 lifetimes so that they could force incarnate many things from the astral world or force reincarnate things from the astral world to take up mantle of responsibility for lineages for 200 to 300 years of industrialization.
A question for you. Did the Archons maneuver us into cities for this purpose, to group us so we could be manipulated en masse? Because that started back in the Industrial Revolution. Is that part of their bounding around time and maneuvering us into position for this event?
Yes. The Industrial Revolution, the whole point of the Industrial Revolution was to put people on a 40, 60, or 100-hour work week so they could never invest into their self-education or free will. And the Industrial Revolution also meant that you had to eliminate those societies that had oral traditions like the Native Americans or the Aborigines or the South Pacific. So that's why there was a massive buildup to eliminate any natural culture, native culture species. By eliminating the people that were the oral traditions changed, you would be forced into living into a mass industrial complex through cities, and then they could manipulate you on a mass scale as we introduced technology. Yes.
Yeah, I think if you look at the starting ceremony or the ending ceremony for the Olympic Games, I think the starting ceremony where they actually looked at the process of industrializing England.
Yep.
It was literally turning people into little ants in a little anthill. And there's your mass mind control kicking in at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So as you say, the oral traditions are very important in exploration of the individual self. And if you remove that out of culture and replace it with propaganda, bingo, then you get to control huge numbers of people.
Yep. We're a media-driven culture now. The oral traditions don't exist. The only culture we pass down is through the propaganda media.
And of course our wonderful schooling system which is not an educational system per se. It's a schooling system.
It's an occupational system. It just occupies your time growing up. And
Yeah,
feeds
well,
you propaganda.
The sheer stress that's on people's lives to simply survive from day to day, whilst being fed by this media machine, is the ultimate distraction. People just have no time to invest in their own spiritual individual development. They are simply trying to survive. So, yeah, we've been massively manoeuvred. Everything that's happened for hundreds of years has all pointed to this situation where we are literally a controlled society. Now, how does the concept of energy harvesting play into this? It's talked about a lot, and there's obviously humans are incredibly creative, and our creativity is just being focused into activity, and allowing us to actually be completely have wagons circled around us by propaganda.
Okay. I'll try to explain this as best as I can. I may lose you. When they set up the Bible and they set up all the war concepts, they set up sacred geometry cities. And sacred geometry cities are meant to separate us on a dream time scale. So there were places where energy would amass. New York City's one, Washington, D.C.'s one, Melbourne's one. And each of these cities that are sacred geometry set up cities are collection points for the local energies of those areas. And then those collection points go into a master collection point, which is the Vatican. And then the Vatican sends that energy into Israel, into the sacred structures that were built there 2,000 and 3,000 or even 100,000 years ago. They understand that there's a grid of pyramids on our world, and there's 9 layers to them, and our world is a fortress. And the only way to stay in charge of the incarnation grid is to have 1 or 2 layers of the fortress grid. Even though they don't have control over all of the grids, they have a control over enough of them to be the dominant of the incarnation grid. So it's all about coalescing energy and then reinvesting that energy into the systems of domination control that are physical buildings. Like anywhere there's a mass media building, there's sacred geometry built into the building so that when the upper management sends energy to the system of domination and control, it spreads it out equally so all the system is equally fed. But each person in this world is taxed on energy from the moment you come out of the birth canal. So there's always a feeding of this system. So when you unplug from the grid, you're not sending any energy. When you unplug from the matrix, you're not sending any energy to it. And it's coming to a point where they are using just about as much energy as they take in to what they put out. And this tipping of the scales for the Unified Dreamtime Society means they're going to be in the minus, and they must start using their own energy. And when they start using their own energy, they cannot maintain the system of domination and control.
Okay. Energetic game. We're back to the energetic game. And folks, if you want to look at a piece of sacred geometry, have a look at a map of Canberra, the capital city of Australia. It is absolutely literally like an eye of Horus.
Yep.
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. is another great one.
Look at Adelaide.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never actually looked at Adelaide.
Have a real close look at Adelaide.
Gee. And all of the cities around the world are all based on a sacred geometric dreamtime harvesting principle then?
Correct.
Wow, so they herded us into cities that were essentially dream catchers.
Yep.
Fascinating.
They all kind of met in Genoa, Italy, under a peace, their version of a peace flag where, no one's going to kill each other, bring your bodyguards, et cetera, et cetera. And there is where they charted industrialization in conjunction with 2,000 off-world species and all of the subterranean species that were going to be a part of the actual third density domination and control lineages, because many of the hollow earthers had to make choices that they had to come to the surface and be born into 1, 2, or 3 lifetimes so that they could force incarnate many things from the astral world or force reincarnate things from the astral world to take up mantle of responsibility for lineages for 200 to 300 years of industrialization. That was the key to set up an industrialization. You needed the soul family elders to say, yeah, you got to learn how to leave the fields and work your backs off in the foundries. You have to learn how to disconnect from, animal husbandry and all the wonderful things that comes from breeding animals, not just for food. You have to learn, how to come and be a secretary, or you have to learn how to be a doctor, or you have to learn how to, work 19 hours a day as a child slave labor, because the rest of the world needed hats. Okay? They had to be disconnected from the natural livingness and connected into a new form of non-natural livingness, in which the wizard class, posing as scientists at that area, were going to rapidly change the belief system through the use of abusive astronomy, abusive alchemy, meaning at the time they were teaching stuff that were absolutely wrong. And that was intentional, because each generation would make the next mistake and the next mistake and the next mistake. So industrialization became commonly accepted with the exchange of new coins. Those new coins related to the Black Post in Rome. And then finally the priestly wizard class agreed to allow industrialization to happen. And once that began is where the rest of the Hollow Earth organizations that were in opposition to the Popery and his, Draco thugs, kind of agreed that there would be a unity DNA farming concept. And it was like the first time a good portion of the worldly, off-worldly beings here that are part of the larger scale DNA farming experiments agreed that they would let this industrialization process go as they began attempting to mass harvest souls off of third density and convince them to be fourth density beings, because they needed more third and fourth density wizards and priest class before the setup of the telegraph or any electromagnetic transmission and transportation process. If that all makes sense.
Yeah. Like one metaphor, like I remember in the Walking in Energy shows, you talked about this is just like to offer a pattern of what's going on. You talked about how the modern TVs, they have a window of where they can work and influence people. And the technology can't be too far in advance because it won't have an effect. So I see around this time there was like a consolidation of all, like say the 5800 realities, where there was a connection going on, and the bubbles of realities were sort of being defeated to align themselves in the disunity-unity reality, which sort of the industrial age was sort of a culmination of like achieving that goal. And then it's what do you do with that goal after it? So I mean, I've even taken note of like things like you're talking about how getting children to work for 19 hours to make hats, slave labor and stuff. And I mean like fashion and trends were like cultural influences to sort of generate sort of interest in the industrial age and stuff like that, because cotton sort of like fabric production was a big thing of that. But that's a tangent, but it's like I see that sort of pattern.
It's a good tangent because the cotton wasn't available because it had to come from India, which had humongous taxes, and the crown and the Pope didn't like it. But once cotton became available from the United States, it changed the entire fashion industry, which actually meant children who would just be at home picking whatever fruits and vegetables or stealing from the king's lands suddenly could have jobs as a cottage industry.
Yeah, textile industry was a massive thing for the industrial early on stages because it wasn't really advanced technology. It was just mass labor sort of thing.
Everyone knew how to make their own clothes, and as long as you could make it 95% the way they wanted it to look and it fit two sizes, you were hired.
Yeah, because they could export it and then create commonality in the different large cities, which were a part of the industrialization as well. Yeah,
which is what the remote viewers were doing. We're looking for fashion trends and statements so they could seize the wealth for the future and continue to have that power by creating something in the reality that was a commonality.
fascinating. There's like, this is a tangent as well, because like there's a really cool soft disclosure new TV show called Falling Water, which is about these beings that are very powerful dreamers, and it's like what you're talking about, the collective dream time and tapping into that. And there's a girl that's very advanced, and her actual role in society is picking the trends, and she gets paid a lot of money to like see the trends in society. So she carries a camera around, and she's just like, she get like me with my videos and stuff and the images. It's like she's seeing that in the reality, and she's just instincts is like that's what next year's trend is going to be about. You know what I mean? So I get exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So knowing the trends meant you actually knew what was solidified future versus potential future. And that's what separated the weak wizards from the advanced wizards, whatever class they were a part of. So to advance it to the next level is once the first steam railroads were introduced, that was the first thing that began truly connecting the disunity reality via railroads that came, from deep under earth, were reforged in the industrialization of slave labor at a different level. And then the removal of horse from full integration and connection to the people and replacing it by the first tractor, steam tractors, et cetera, because the steam tractor, it would work one season and then be broke for 2 seasons, work for 1 season, be broke for 5 seasons, and then, they got better and better each generation.
Yeah, interesting. Like I've actually got the clip where you actually mentioned with JP about the steam trains were actually like not meant to be released, and they were like meant to be like used underground for shipping coal in Germany, and then someone sold the plans off to make some cash, and then that concept got bled into the reality, and then they were unleashed to the world.
Because industrialization was already out, and there were smart geniuses who learned how to draw. They were paupers the lifetime before, and the next lifetime they came back in, even though they were in reincarnation and in child labor, because there were new skills available to them. Like if you were going to be a clothes maker, you had to learn how to draw.
And I think part of the distortion of the teachings that we've been given is that there are only 2 choices in every situation. It's like even the word a dilemma means it's a 2-horned goat. And it'll either turn its head to the left or the right, but you still get stabbed by the thing. But that there are other ways, and because we've been talking about this whole positive, negative, neutral thing. This is an interesting thing. In America, right? You've got plugs, and you've got 2 pins on the plug. You have live and neutral. In Britain, we have live, earth, and neutral. And,
actually, most of America switched over to three-prong plugs now, though there are devices that don't, because they made it part of our code for everybody to have GFI, ground fault interrupters.
Right. So that's a So when somebody's sort of jerking away, actually you've got a lot less voltage there, so you don't jerk away so much when you grab the live wire. When
you die by electricity in Scotland, you die the hard way.
It's quite you get quite a jolt from it. I'm always touching the live wires. I live dangerously. In this very safe way. It's always, fascinated me why America has 110 volt and we have 240. Why America has 60. What the heck was that? Has 60 cycles on the mains, and why we have 50 on the mains. And I'm sure that's something to do with creating a disharmonic field, 10 hertz and 50 hertz and 60 hertz. Do you know anything about that?
Fascinating. Is there any other? Well, actually, the other thing that they appear to be using more and more heavily is the electrical grid itself.
correct.
Actually, it was one of the places the Lily Wave was appearing. It's called the Lily Wave. Was the electrical grid. There are stories of electrical engineers that detected that this signal was actually on the electrical grid and were told to mind their own business by the essentially by the higher levels of the power company. So, what's that particular intent? More of the same.
Similar in Australia, before they switched over to wires, the higher insulated wires. Did you have what's known as knob and tube? You know what I'm talking about?
Haven't heard of that term.
Basically, you have an unshielded wire. Basically, it's a wire with a cloth cover, and you have a ceramic tube, and the wire would be stretched between the house, between that ceramic tube all over. And that would create basically a cage of energy around the house. And that was the original control factor of what you're talking about, that Lily grid. When they switched over to different types of wire, the different types of shielding, it was so that they can literally modify the omnidirectional frequency that comes out of the wiring grid in the home.
Mm-hmm. And again, they're overlaying signals.
Yep.
And the intent of those is?
Well, to limit your consciousness, ultimately. So instead of raising the actual ley line energy levels, they could target several thousand homes with this Lily frequency, or whatever frequency they were going to use, so it raised the energy of the people in that area, and then they would send collecting entities to milk you of your Kundalini energy or your endocrine system.
Okay, what manner of entities were those particular ones?
Mostly astral entities, unless you were identified as a high-powered psychic, and they figured out your contracts, and then they would send hardcore entities after you to physically retrieve you and bring you into the programs. Yeah, also it has to do with the distance of the wires. So, I mean, America is a lot bigger. When they were building it, they had to do it cheap, and they needed to get the consistency, and the type of technology they had then was something that could put out a higher load, that could foresee their creation into it, even though the system was already reached its peak because they left it on poles instead of sticking it underground. So it was meant to be shortchanged, that system.
All right, so they were just being cheap rather than consciously creating a 10 hertz difference between the two countries.
Just being cheap.
Just the cock-up factor.
Exactly.
There is no conspiracy.
They're just being cheap.
It's just
sometimes that is the conspiracy. They're being cheap.
Yeah. Where can they get the best price for what they want? And that's this is one of the things that's almost like a signature, is that there is this kind of Keystone Cops kind of energy about these so-called powers that be. They try to give this kind of impression of being really smooth, but there's a lot of mistakes that go on because stuff happens in this world.
Mm-hmm. Here's an example of one of their mistakes. All right, what was the big invention of the 1800s?
1800s. That must have been electricity.
The train.
Oh, right, the train. Really?
The train. I believe 1816. Electricity wasn't you didn't have Morse code until the 1830s or 1840s. It might even been the 50s. Train. The train was a technology that was only meant to be used underground in some of the new bases that they were building in Bavaria, and they wanted a system and a way to transfer the new coal settlements that they had found there. And somebody in the Bavarian Illuminati sold it to the technology unbeknownst to his grandmasters to some other people, and they started building trains. And since they weren't highly communicative the way they were then, people all of a sudden started developing trains all over the world, and they couldn't do anything to stop it.
So it was like an idea that spread itself out through the morphological field.
Yep.
Yeah. So trains take us all, incredible use of iron and aluminium to transport the electricity across the world. So there's, an aluminium, it's like you can get the stuff out, but it appears cheap, but it's very expensive in terms of the pollution that it makes and the energy that it takes to deal with it. And of course, it, sort of rots our brain.
Yeah, if you were going to be a metal foundry person, you still had to know how to cut the piece of metal or how to shape it, so on and so forth. So they learned artistic skills, and then they were able to self-educate because they're all in the cities near libraries.
And the recent sort of recordings I've done with you, like Australia, Canada and stuff, a part of that was the establishment on various continents of the railway lines connections, which was, you talked about it being the wood and metal grid around the world.
Yep. The wood metal grid around the world.
Which was just a stepping stone in the like the industrial age sort of reality sort of management of the disunity unity sort of thing. So
yep.
But that's another topic as well. But this is all sort of the stepping up to sort of the internet and the perceptions of it, because it's like it's all about maintaining the reality and
right.
Controlling the populace to manage
right.
the co-creative aspects, like and setting them up for failure.
So the next leap here is allowing the worldwide society to come up with its own ideas, while at the same time the off-worlders were scanning for ultra geniuses, self-awakeners, self-illuminated people, making direct connections, making pickups and drop-offs and kidnappings and offerings of contracts, so on and so forth. So they were trying to get as many as they could and move them 100 to 200 years in the future, so that they would be born in the 50s to be a part of the first internet, or be born in the 70s to be young children in the 90s coming to power, leapfrogging the genius from the back then to the future.
So there was like a sort of a no-time perception of talent to be like instilled in a certain future percept time
right.
for a certain task. Like say,
right.
There's these, say, particular people that invent something that change the world, like say with computers or something like that. You're sort of are you talking on the soul level, or they're actually transported through time?
Both.
Okay, so from a soul perception, they're bred into a body like a skin suit with technology at a certain time and then obviously they're guided from birth, sort of with their talent to not in a violation of free will way, but like conducive to what their, their expression. So like they might go through university and then they're given certain teachers that, that culminate in them producing some, maybe a search engine or a software sort of for computers or a social media sort of thing,
Huh? So you have an intermediary process where the AAA league of the wizard priesty class, which was the ship captains, which could learn a tremendous amount about how the world works, there needed to be an extended process to remove power from those self-forming organizations that became a major thorn in the side of rapid industrialization. British allowing there being pirates, the theft of gold from the Americas by the Spanish and alchemical organizations hiring pirates organizations to steal said gold or sink said gold, so that it could be picked up by off-world beings. So there was what's called a Pogram, or a purging, of the AAA League ship captains that had learned how to lineage jump or timeline jump and bring crews with them, actually, like incarnate in a certain area, or they knew enough about the immortality process, so when they died, they came back into the son of one of the ship people, and that would be recognized as the captain. He's back to being captain. Within 5 years, he knows most of his past lives, and they're child captains. So they needed to eliminate that process. So they, how do I put this? They essentially gave large volumes of money to middlemen that had no knowledge or wisdom of esoterica, and would hire these captains to go to certain areas to do whatever it is they were doing, and then the information be passed to someone else, and there'd be a trap there waiting for them, whether it was an off-world trap, an on-world trap, a subsurface trap, whatever. And that began eliminating as much as 65% of those that could present opposition to the creation of the first telegraph network, first Marconi radio, and the majority of the ships were no longer be creating out of wood, which are grandfather, grandmother spirits that have a positive influence over the people on the ship, replaced by metal that was founded and forged through slave labor. Huge change that needed to be done for industrialization to truly take to the levels that they wanted it to do by the mid-1900s.
Fascinating. I want to just offer a bit of a tangent this as